January 31st, 1957, I know some of you were around then. In Ottawa, members of Parliament gathered to proclaim the observance of the second Monday in October as a day of general thanksgiving to Almighty God for the bountiful harvest with which Canada has been blessed. And that is the official proclamation that to this day governs the occurrence of Thanksgiving Day on the second Monday of October. Before that, it's interesting history. Thanksgiving moved around, was celebrated all different times, usually late October, early November, and sometimes it was celebrated for different reasons. There was one year, and off the top of my head, I can't remember, but there was one occasion when it was a day of Thanksgiving was proclaimed by Parliament for the recovery of a member of the royal family. Okay? So, but now we think of Thanksgiving as second Monday of October, and we think of it as the Parliament declared, giving thanks for the bountiful harvest with which Canada has been blessed. And I think Thanksgiving is a beautiful thing. It is great that we have a holiday centered around the idea of gratitude. We start talking about gratitude, and this quote seems to show up. It's from Cicero, who was a Roman philosopher, statesman. As you can see by his dates, lived about 100 years before Jesus. And this is credited to him, or some variation of this saying. A thankful heart is not only the greatest virtue, but the parent of all the other virtues. Or to put it in today's language, we would say that gratitude is the mother of all virtues. A grateful person. You think of a grateful person, and one of the questions we could have asked in our prayers of thanksgiving this morning is, who's the most grateful person you know? You think of a grateful person, you think of somebody who is generous. You think of somebody who is compassionate. You think of a grateful person is a patient person, a kind person, a serving person. But I think more than that, gratitude is almost synonymous with happiness. Happiness can be somewhat a vague, abstract thing. We talk about being happy, and sometimes we can mean, I'm happy after my turkey. I just really enjoyed my turkey. Sometimes it can mean self-fulfillment. We're happy with our lives. We've fulfilled some goals or some aspirations in our life. And so happiness can be abstract in that way. But I think the times in our lives when we are truly grateful, most grateful, are probably the times when, if I can put it this way, you've been most alive in the present moment, most happy. And so gratitude is something that is close to happiness, and therefore it's something that we all could use a bit more of. And so it's great that we have this Thanksgiving holiday. It's great because I don't think that as human beings we are actually wired for gratitude. Let me explore that with these questions. Are we wired or not as human beings for gratitude? So when you got up this morning and you looked in the mirror, right? Did you see beauty? You're laughing because you're not wired for gratitude. Or did you see the blemish, the zit that you wished wasn't there? When you get feedback, something you've done, something you've shared, do you hear the 10 positive things that are said? Or do you only remember and dwell on the single negative feedback item? You did this, 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 and this, and this, and this really well. But, and that's the one, even to this day, you remember. You know, there's been all sorts of studies done, and to determine what is the ideal ratio of positive words or comments that are needed to overcome a single negative comment. And this seems to be the ratio that these studies have latched onto, that we need 5 positive comments to overcome a single negative comment. This means that for every negative comment, every negative interaction, experience that you have, you need 5 positive comments. You need 5 positive interactions to maintain a healthy and constructive balance. And that ratio is widely recognized in all sorts of contexts, in personal relationships, in workplace feedback, in just improving overall well-being. Because for some reason, our hearts are fixated and obsessed with what we don't have, what we lack, with the holes, with the problems. And many of us go to sleep at night thinking about those things. And we wake up in the morning still thinking about those things. We are not hardwired for gratitude. And so on this Thanksgiving weekend, I want to consider with you some of the obstacles. Why? What are the obstacles? Why aren't we hardwired for gratitude? How can we be more grateful in our lives? And how do people who are not hardwired for gratitude become grateful people, happy people? This was one of the passages that was read this morning, and I want to zero in on these couple of sentences, or this single sentence from Colossians 1 that we heard earlier. In Colossians 1, Paul writes these words, just to refresh our memories. May you be prepared to endure everything with patience, while joyfully giving thanks to the Father, who has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light. Joyfully giving thanks to the Father. I think that one of the biggest obstacles to gratitude is something that we probably don't want to admit. We can see it in other people, and we can talk about other people having the problem, but we don't want to talk about greed, our own greed. It's someone else's, but it's hard for me to see it in myself. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I suspect that there'll be very few, if any, hands if I ask, how many of you people here today are greedy? But we think of greed, when we think of greed, we think of it as an extreme. We think of it in terms of extremes, right? Greed is when I not only want what I have, greed is when I want everything that you have and everything that this person has. And I want it all. And I'm not going to let anything stop me from getting what I want. That's greed, as we often think about it. But maybe greed is a little more innocuous than that. Maybe we could say greed is simply that I want more than what I have. Or maybe you could say it this way, greed is I want to be more than who I am. Greed is being dissatisfied with your present tense. And so everything becomes, you know what, I'll be really happy, I'll be really fulfilled in my life when I reach this stage. When this happens, when I have this, I'll be happy. And so life becomes a series of stepping stones geared toward that future goal, that future place that you never actually get to. When will you ever have enough? Culturally, I think we bless that kind of greed, and we cloak it and we call it ambition. Oh, she has a lot of ambition. Oh, he's an ambitious guy. And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with aspirations, okay? But is my aspiration, is my ambition driven by wanting more, by needing more? By that sense that I don't have enough now? I had never seen this study before. Came across it this past week preparing for this message. Harvard University study determined that people spend 46.9% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they're doing. Ah, gotcha. Mind wandering. See the headline there? Wandering mind, not a happy mind. This mind wandering, pay attention here, letting your mind wander typically makes us unhappy, according to this study. Let me quote from the authors, two psychologists, Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert. They say, a human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. The ability to think about what is not happening is a cognitive achievement that comes at an emotional cost. What are they saying? In other words, this human propensity that we have for living anywhere but the present. I know you're thinking about Thanksgiving. Are you having dinner today or tomorrow? Turnips, did I hear? This propensity for living anywhere but the present is actually an indicator of unhappiness, of pain and hurt in people's lives. And our ability to project onto the future and to be afraid and anxious about things that probably will never happen is actually part and parcel of why we're so ungrateful and unhappy. Listen to these words from Killingsworth and Gilbert. Quote, many philosophical and religious traditions teach that happiness is to be found by living in the moment. And practitioners are trained to resist mind wandering and to be here now. This new research, the authors say, suggests that these traditions are right. Hey, I know one of those traditions. Jesus, do not worry about tomorrow. The second obstacle that we have when it comes to gratitude is self-pity. What is self-pity? Self-pity is when I think the world owes me a thank you. Thank you, Daryl, for being alive. Maybe an extreme. Self-pity is when I'm hung up on some credit or reward that I don't feel I've got. He didn't even say thank you. Didn't even acknowledge what I'd done. And the self-pitying person is the one who's, woe is me, the martyr type person. I think when I wallow in self-pity, I'm living in the past I'm nursing grudges. I'm keeping accounts. I'm judgmental. I'm not saying that there are times when those aren't justifiable, that there's not genuine reasons to feel undone, to feel burdened. But self-pity can be self-defeating. In John chapter 5, Jesus meets a man at the pool of Bethesda. If you know the story, the quote is on the screen here. He's been invalid for 38 years. 38 years. And Jesus says to him, "Do you want to be made well?" And the man's response, notice the man's response. He complains about how no one helps him into the pool when the water is stirred up. And when he tries to get to the pool, someone else gets down, steps in front of him, blocks his way. For 38 years, he's been a victim. And he's been a victim for so long that he's almost, I wonder if he's fallen in love with being a victim. There's an element of self-pity here. And you know what? Self-pity is alienating. If people always feel like they're failing you, they're not going to invite you to Thanksgiving dinner. Or they're going to stop joining you for Thanksgiving dinner. Because I don't think any of us want to be in the presence of somebody who is full of self-pity. It's exhausting. And so to the extent that you feel that you don't have the things that you feel like you deserve, you'll either be self-pitying or worse, become a bitter, hateful person. And to the extent that you have things that you feel you do not deserve, you will become grateful. You see, there's two concepts there that are obstacles to gratefulness: greed and self-pity. And both of these run on different concepts, I think. Greed runs on the concept of enoughness. And you're caught up with being enough or having enough. And you never have, never are enoughness. And self-pity runs on the idea of deservedness. I deserve more. And so both enoughness and deservedness can create lives that are completely centered around reward, achievement, and earning. And I think they're dead ends. I wish they weren't, but I think they are. There's a cliche you may have heard. It's something along the lines of, happiness is not having what you want, it's wanting what you have. It's a cliche, but I think it's actually one of those cliches that's true. Happiness is not having what you want, it's wanting what you have. Deservedness and enoughness are opposed to gratitude. So how does an entitled or a self-pitying person become a grateful person? How does a greedy person, an ambitious person, a bitter person become grateful? I'll tell you how not to become grateful. And it's to be told that you need to be grateful. You know, if you've been a parent or a child, a parent to a child or a child, and I guess we're all children at one time, were you ever told, now say thank you? I hear. You weren't too thrilled with that, were you? When you're told to be thankful for something, probably you're not thankful for it. Grudging thanks is no thanks at all. And so I'm not going to tell you that in order to become a grateful person, you need to be grateful. When Paul asks, or when Paul talks in the passage that we had read this morning, when Paul talks about joyfully giving thanks, that's almost redundant, isn't it? Because I think thanks is joyful. You don't give thanks grudgingly. We always want to, and we always give thanks joyfully. Any thanks, any gratitude that is leveraged, any gratitude that is negotiated is not gratitude. Or at least it's not the kind that you want. Don't make giving thanks an 11th commandment. Gratitude is not a matter of just having more things to be grateful for. That's not the way to become more grateful. I wish that were the case, but we all know that sometimes there are people that seem to have the most materially that are the least grateful. So that's not the answer. Having more doesn't mean that you will be more grateful. In fact, sometimes it seems, right, that the people who have the least are the most grateful. Want to watch this movie? Haven't seen it? May watch it in the next day or two, darling, I'm telling you. But I read about this movie this past week, so I want to watch. This is a movie from 2007, Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Easy title to remember, right? But what's fascinating is this is based on a true story of Jean-Dominique Boubier, who was the editor-in-chief of a French fashion magazine. And the film follows Boubier's life after he suffers a stroke. And he's left with what they call locked-in syndrome. And the only way that he can communicate is by blinking his left eye. So, of course, he goes through stages of bitterness, anger, despair. But Boubier develops a system of communication with his speech and language therapist. And this is what they develop. He blinks his left eye as she reads a list of letters, A, B, C, D. And when he blinks, that's the letter. And she reads this list of letters, and he laboriously spells out his messages, letter by blinking. And he writes an entire book, his memoir, using this slow and exhausting communication technique. If you thought this sermon was long, just imagine if we had to do it that way. Incredible story where this man, and this is, I'm not putting, if you have Amazon Prime, it's available on Amazon Prime for a small fee. It's an incredible story. This man, who he was entitled, he was at the peak of his career in most people's eyes. But he becomes grateful. He becomes grateful by being reduced to nothing. And he isn't just grateful for his children. He isn't just grateful for the women in his life. He's not just grateful for the people taking care of him. That's understandable. He becomes grateful for being able to communicate, being able to express himself, to have another day. That's how an ungrateful person becomes grateful. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes that, doesn't it? It takes suffering, it takes tragedy to force a person to see life as a gift rather than a reward or a project. Life, in those circumstances when some tragedy befalls you or there's suffering, life is no longer about figuring it out, getting the right answer to what you need to do with your life. Life becomes an experience. Life becomes a gift, and a joyful one, full of thanksgiving, even if not without suffering. But secondly, contrition and humility are not the only things that you need to become a grateful, happy person. Something else needs to happen. Something big. Gratitude doesn't happen in a vacuum. Gratitude is a response. You're grateful to someone. You're grateful for someone. You're grateful to or for something. All the admonitions and gratitudes become a big corporate thing. All the admonitions that you've seen this past week, give thanks or be thankful. You notice they never identify who. Gratitude's not self-generated. It's always a response. And so we need to be corrected of our attitude of deservedness. I deserve this. Thank you. Thank you that I worked hard this year and it's been a good year. We need to rid ourselves of this enoughness. Oh, I had more, enough. Back to that passage in Colossians. Paul is talking about, as Christians, we are grateful for an inheritance. An inheritance. An inheritance is a gift, right? An inheritance is a gift of what someone else has done. And they give it to you. Not because of anything you've done, but because of who you are. An inheritance, it's a gracious thing. And the Christian faith is not only a religion of grace. A Christian faith is also a religion of gratitude. And all of our life is lived as a grateful response to this grace. Mark Galli, former editor of Christianity Today, wrote these words: "Only unconditional grace can transform a hardened heart into a grateful heart. Only a free gift can sabotage any notion of the quid pro quo. Only an utterly merciful act of love can fashion a new creation capable of love." The merciful act of love here, as outlined by Paul, is that we are people, you see it there, who have been rescued from the power of darkness and transferred into the kingdom of light. And the mechanism of that transfer? The forgiveness of sins. Because the forgiven person is a grateful person. Forgiven people are grateful people because they've been forgiven through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that's the heart of our faith. That's the message that we proclaim and we remember each and every Sunday. And telling you to be grateful will not give you what it takes to be grateful. If you need to be told how to be grateful, you're not grateful. All that we can do is to announce over and over and over again the beautiful, profound truth of a God who was reduced to nothing. Philippians chapter 2. A God who was reduced to nothing so that you could be grateful for everything. And so Paul writes to the Colossians, may we joyfully give thanks to the Father. Not because studies show that it's good for our health, not because it's the right thing to do. We joyfully give thanks to the Father because the Father has qualified us to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light, has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light. He's rescued us from the power of darkness, or some translations say the dominion of darkness, brought us into the kingdom of the Son that he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. That's the good news of the gospel. Happy Thanksgiving.